if I was a man, and I'm not a man, but if I was a man, I wouldn't hire a woman. I wouldn't do it. And I say it all the time, and I say that, and that is something that women need to consider when they're talking about this stuff. When you are saying that a man complimenting you and saying, I really like your outfit today, is a form of sexism. If you're a man, why hire a woman, right? So you fought all this time to be able to get into the workforce, only to say these are going to be the rules. If you say anything, even if you compliment me, if you look at me, anything, I'm going to have a reason to fight you. And by the way, you're going to want to settle and pay me, because even just the stain of an accusation is enough to ruin men. So if you're a guy, right, in this society, in this Me Too environment, in this litigation rich environment of misogyny and sexism and all of these claims, what is the value add? What's the risk? The benefit and the risk. I can't do the analysis and say, I'd just be like, no, I'm just not hiring one. Give me all the men.
Good morning. Today is Saturday, April the 1st, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the Star-Spangled Banner, we will have no free lunch, State of the Union, juiced Merlot, emotional manipulation, and George Lakoff. All that and more when I come back. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain standing and remove your hats for the national anthem of the United States of America.
Thank you. And now, No Free Lunch, 250 Economic Truths by David-Bahnsen.
What sense would it make to classify a man as handicapped because he is in a wheelchair today if he is expecting to be walking again in a month and competing in track meets before the year is out? Yet Americans are given class labels on the basis of their transient location in the income stream. If most Americans do not stay in the same broad income bracket for even a decade, their repeatedly changing class makes class itself a nebulous concept. Yet the intelligentsia are habituated, if not addicted, to seeing the world in class terms, just as they constantly speak of the deliberate actions of a personified society when trying to explain the results of systemic interactions among millions of individuals. Thomas Sowell. The language of class is second only in offensiveness to the mentality behind it. It is used as a device by self-interested ideologues who require a construct of oppression. In fact, unlike race and gender, one's class can, and very often does, change in a society that celebrates vertical mobility. For the aspirational society, class should be a very temporary description. The obsession over class speaks not to the limitations of such aspiration, but the agenda of those who would hold people back.
And that was There's No Free Lunch by David-Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the rape of the mind.
The need for companionship. Not enough attention has been given to the psychology of loneliness, especially to the implications of enforced isolation of prisoners. When the sensory stimuli of everyday life are removed, man's entire personality may change. Social intercourse, our continual contact with our colleagues, our work, the newspapers, voices, traffic, our loved ones, and even those we don't like, all are daily nourishment for our senses and minds. We select what we find interesting, reject what we do not want to absorb. Every day, every citizen lives in many small worlds of exchange of gratifications. Little hatreds, pleasant experiences, irritations, delights. And he needs these stimuli to keep him on the alert. Hour by hour, reality, in cooperation with our memory, integrates the millions of facts in our lives by repeating them over and over. As soon as man is alone, closed off from the world and from the news of what is going on, his mental activity is replaced by quite different processes. Long-forgotten anxieties come to the surface. Long-repressed memories knock on his mind from inside. His fantasy life begins to develop and assume gigantic proportions. He cannot evaluate or check his fantasies against the events of his ordinary days, but very soon they may take possession of him. I remember very clearly my own fantasies during the time I was in a Nazi prison. It was almost impossible for me to control my depressive thoughts of hopelessness. I had to tell myself over and over again, think, keep your senses alert, don't give in. I tried to use all my psychiatric knowledge to keep my mind in a state of relaxed mobilization, and on many days I felt it was a losing battle. Some experiments have shown that people who are deprived, for even a very short time, of all sensory stimuli, no touch, no hearing, no smell, no sight, quickly fall into a kind of hallucinatory hypnotic state. Isolation from the multitude of impressions that normally bombard us from the outside world creates strange and frightening symptoms. According to Huron, who performed experiments on a group of students at McGill University by placing each student in his own pitch-black, soundproof room ventilated with filtered air and encasing his hands in heavy leather mittens and his feet in heavy boots, little by little, their brains go dead or slip out of control. Even in 24 hours of such extreme sensual isolation, all the horror phantoms of childhood are awakened, and various pathological symptoms appear. Our instinct of curiosity demands continual feeding. If it is not satisfied, the internal hounds of hell are aroused. The prisoner kept in isolation, although his isolation is by no means as extreme as in the laboratory test, also undergoes a severe mental change. His guards and inquisitors become more and more his only source of contact with reality, with those stimuli he needs even more than bread. No wonder that he gradually develops a peculiar, submissive relationship to them. He is affected not only by his isolation from social contacts, but by sexual starvation as well. The latent dependency needs, the latent homosexual tendencies that lie deep in all men make him willing to accept his guard as a substitute father figure. The inquisitor may be cruel and bestial, but the very fact that he acknowledges his victim's existence gives the prisoner a feeling that he has received some little bit of affection. What a conflict may thus arise between a man's traditional loyalties and these new ones. There are only a few personalities which are so completely self-sufficient that they can resist the need to yield, to find some human companionship, to overcome the unbearable loneliness. During the World Wars, prisoners first suffered from a peculiar burning homesickness already called barbed wire disease. Memories of mother, home, and family made the soldiers identify with babyhood again. But as they become more used to the prison camp life, thoughts of home and family also created positive values and helped make the prison camp life less harrowing. Even the prisoner who is not kept in isolation can feel lonely in the unorganized mass of prisoners. His fellow prisoners can become his enemies as easily as they can become his friends. His hatred of his guards can be displaced and turned against those imprisoned with him. Instead of suspecting the enemy, the victim may become suspicious of his companions in misery. In the Nazi concentration camps and the Korean POW camps, a kind of mass paranoia often developed. Loneliness was increased because the prisoners cut themselves off from one another through suspicion and hatred. This distrust was encouraged by the guards. They constantly suggested to their victims that nobody cared for them and nobody was concerned about what was happening to them. You're alone. Your friends on the outside don't know whether you're alive or dead. Your fellow prisoners don't even care. Thus, all expectation of a future was killed, and the resulting uncertainty and hopelessness became unbearable. Then the guards sowed suspicion and spread terrifying rumors. You were here because those people you call your friends betrayed you. Your buddies here have squealed on you. Your friends on the outside have deserted you. Playing on man's old loyalties, making him feel deserted and alone, force him into submission and collapse. The times that I myself wavered and entertained thoughts about joining the opposite forces always occurred after periods of extreme loneliness and deep-seated yearnings for companionship. I describe these phenomena of self-betrayal in chapter 14. At such moments, the jailer or enemy may become a substitute friend.
And that was The Need for Companionship from The Rape of the Mind by Joost Meerlo, M.D. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Chapter 6 of the book 30 Covert Emotional Manipulation Tactics by Adelyn-Birch.
6. Intimacy or intensity, a relationship litmus test. I have flown and fallen, and I have swum deep and drowned, but there should be more to love than I survived it. Lisa Montchev, So Silver Bright. It seems that magic has entered your life. It brings with it once-in-a-lifetime soulmate love, true romance, amazing sex. You are swept off your feet and taken to an enchanted world just for two. One that floats like a bubble high above the mundane world below. You never expect this bubble to burst. You believe the incredible intensity you share with your partner indicates a deep connection, one that will last a lifetime. Falling in love is a heady experience that has the potential to become a strong and lasting connection based on emotional intimacy. That can't happen if your partner isn't capable of emotional intimacy, though. You may not even notice a lack of true intimacy if you're dazed and deluded by the extraordinary intensity of your experience. The smoke and mirrors of manipulation can easily distract you from the truth. Intimacy is based on trust, understanding, and vulnerability. People who become emotionally intimate do so by taking the risk of being emotionally vulnerable with their partner, revealing their true selves, and feeling emotionally safe afterward, instead of feeling judged, mocked, invalidated, or rejected. Intimacy is based on emotional safety, patience, respect, consistency, and a mutual give and take. Without self-disclosure, there can be no intimacy. The more intimate you are with someone, the safer you feel, and the more worthwhile the relationship. You're free to be yourself within an atmosphere of mutual acceptance and understanding. There's nothing more intimate in life than simply being understood. Brad Meltzer, The Inner Circle. Intensity, on the other hand, involves drama, anxiety, uncertainty, and fear. It's all about push-pull, hot-cold, high-low. According to Harriet Lerner, Ph.D., in her book, Dance of Intimacy, intensity is being completely lost in the emotion of unreasoning desire. It is marked by urgency, sexual desire, anxiety, high-risk choices, and the reckless abandonment of what was once valued. All-consuming euphoria, similar to recreational drug use, addictive chemical reactions in the brain, loss of ability to make rational evaluations of what is true, valuable, and worthy, desire to be always close to that person at any cost. In contrast, Lerner writes that an intimate relationship is one in which neither party silences, sacrifices, or betrays the self, and each party expresses strength and vulnerability, weakness and competence in a balanced way. Intimacy means that we can be who we are in a relationship and allow the other person to do the same. Being who we are requires that we can talk openly about things that are important to us, that we take a clear position on where we stand on important emotional issues, and that we clarify the limits of what is acceptable and tolerable to us in a relationship. That is simply not possible with a manipulator. Bonding created by intensity, emotional highs and lows, is maintained by powerful surges of euphoria-inducing dopamine during the highs, and an intense craving for more during the lows. Learning theorists have found that a pattern of intermittent reinforcement, which is positive reinforcement alternated with punishment, a pattern of abuse and reward, develops the strongest emotional bonds. Intermittent good-bad treatment triggers biological changes as well as emotional ones. Relationships based on intensity are actually the same as an addiction to drugs or alcohol. Interaction with your partner fosters a specific pattern of compulsive behavior and is not really an intimate relationship at all. It's an addiction, in the true sense of the word. These exploitative relationships form a trauma bond, a highly addictive attachment to a person who is hurting you. A person in a trauma bond is essentially addicted to a relationship with someone who is destructive and hurtful. Signs of a trauma bond include the inability to detach and self-destructive denial. Writer and abuse survivor Amanda Damaraki described it perfectly when she wrote, "We cannot walk away, though, because without us realizing it, our abuser has become our human needle, our drug lord of love, the person who owns our self-value and self-worth, and who, in the name of love, can reject us into deep lows with a single glare, or send us to euphoric highs with one simple smile. To know that you are loved for who you are, and to know someone else in all of their vulnerability, and to love them as they are, may be one of life's most fulfilling experiences," says sociologist Brene Brown. Intensity, on the other hand, is the opposite of fulfilling. It is draining, exhausting, crazy-making, and ultimately meaningless and empty. The most important test of intimacy is to ask yourself if your relationship is a safe haven where you feel loved and accepted for being yourself.
And that was Chapter 6 of 30 Covert Emotional Manipulation Tactics by Adelyn-Birch. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, part of Chapter 8 from the book, Don't Think of an Elephant by George Lakoff, Ph.D.
Chapter 8. The Piketty Insight on the Accelerating Wealth Gap. Systemic causation applies to the economy as well as to global warming, and it has effects every bit as dramatic and crucial. There is an accelerating gap, not just widening but accelerating, between the ultra-rich and everyone else. Why? What are the systemic causes and the systemic effects? And is there anything wrong with some people getting that rich and progressively richer over time? The answers to these questions were sharpened in 2014 by an insight of economist Thomas Piketty and his colleagues, an insight that has not yet become framed in public discourse. The Piketty insight showed us that our current concept of rich is not adequate to understand the wealth gap phenomenon. One needs to also comprehend the notions of wealth and proportion of wealth. Wealth correlates with certain forms of freedom, like the freedom to acquire goods or to travel, or freedom of access to certain cultural events, and so on. Wealth also correlates with certain forms of power. For example, paying people to do things is a form of power. Contributing significantly to an election campaign can be a form of power too. Workers are profit creators. That is, they create wealth for others. They may acquire wealth for their work, but their value to their employers typically lies in the wealth they create for those employers. A natural question is, of the wealth created by productive work, how much goes to those who do the work and how much goes to others? And by what means? What is the structure of the system that results in the distribution of wealth and the way that distribution changes? Piketty's Capital in the 21st Century is a work of scholarship of the highest order. It changes, or ought to change, not just our understanding of economics, but our understanding of many things. And he has published it just as we need it most. Here is his basic insight. He studied the history not just of income but of wealth, and he observed that there are two fundamentally different kinds of wealth. Productive wealth. This is wealth generated by work for producing and selling things or services. The kind of wealth Adam Smith talked about. The prototypical case concerns individuals, for example, a baker and a furniture maker. Each makes and sells things, and each needs and buys what the other sells. The baker's income pays the furniture maker, and the furniture maker's income pays the baker. Each works for himself, produces things, gets paid for it, and in a much oversimplified market, each produces wealth for himself and for the other. This is the kind of wealth, productive wealth, measured by the GDP. Piketty calls it G. Reinvestment wealth. This is wealth generated by receiving returns on investments and then reinvesting those returns over and over. This kind of wealth grows exponentially, like compound interest. The more you have, the more you invest, and the more you invest, the more you have. He calls it R. Here's where the concept of proportion comes in. Piketty looks at the proportion of the kinds of wealth, that is, the ratio between R and G over a population. Then he asks, how does it change and why? His research was done by studying tax records in many countries dating back to the 18th century. What he discovered was that up until 1913, most wealth was reinvestment wealth. Even during the period of the Industrial Revolution, which is usually thought of in terms of productive wealth, R was much greater than G. In other words, Piketty showed that the common wisdom is false. Even in capitalist democracies where individual liberty and the market were supposed to allow for productive wealth through work, it turns out that reinvestment wealth was overwhelming. For instance, in France, a capitalist democracy concerned with égalité, in 1910, 70% of the wealth was reinvestment wealth, held by the very wealthy, not productive wealth, distributed over most of the population.
And that was Chapter 8, or at least part of Chapter 8, of Don't Think of an Elephant by Dr. or George Lakoff, Ph.D. So, again, as the leftists want to do, is it's always about money and always about creating class society or classes in the United States where there aren't any. And that's what this is really all about. Communism, most of it is by Europeans for Europeans, because there's still class societies in Europe today. There's kings and queens in England and Holland and various other countries in Europe, and there's aristocracies, and it's still considered wealth is supposed to be associated with title. There's a saying that wealth without title is gauche. So that's why you see very often that rock stars will end up getting knighted by the queen. The whole purpose of knighting them is to legitimize their wealth. When they become knighted, now they become part of the upper classes or the aristocracy or whatever. And so they now they've gone officially, I guess, from being a commoner now to a member of the aristocracy, and their wealth is now legitimate. But in the United States of America, none of that is true. You can go to any store you want to and browse. You can go through Rodeo Drive and go into various boutiques in there and browse around if you want to. You can even buy something if you have the money for it, and nobody is going to give you any gas for it. If you go to England and you're seen as a commoner shopping in a place that's meant for the aristocracy, then your friends are going to ask you if you are, who do you think you are? Who do you think you are? And then if you don't know your place argument. And the same thing happens with the aristocracy. If the aristocracy is seen shopping at Target or browsing around in Target or at McDonald's or whatever like that, they're going to get gas from their own people and from the commoners who are going to say the same thing. Who do you think you are? So, again, all of his analysis is wasted on America and Americans and is better applied to Europe and Europeans. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now something a little bit new. It's a show called State of the Union, and it's about a couple that are on the verge of divorce. And so they're looking to get marital counseling. But before they go and get marital counseling, professional counseling, they're getting together on a regular basis for 10 minutes a day, once a week, to discuss what the issues are that they want to bring up at the marriage counseling. So, and this is a very good example and reflection of, even though it's a British series, you'll hear their British accents, but a very good example of American, British, perhaps Western culture as it stands right now. So this first episode is called a catch-up. So season 1 catch-up, and so I'm assuming that it's going to be where they're going to play little bits of all the episodes during season 1. Here we go.
Thank you for coming.
Oh, that's okay.
Have you been here long?
No. That's my fault. It's not really my fault.
Right. Hugh.
It is my second, though.
You're entitled to 2. When you want a pee break?
I hope so. I'll make it last as long as I can.
It'll seem like you've been for a poo.
Oh, hell. I'll announce right at the beginning that I can never poo in someone else's house. I think I could say just about anything today and you'd laugh. Within reason.
Let's not test that theory out.
There's a difficulty, though. What constitutes reason? There's a talking point.
We've probably got enough talking points without delving into the history of Western philosophy.
You're right. Who was the reason philosopher? I want to say Kant. I want to and I will. Kant. There. I said it. Shall I check?
No, please don't. We've only got a few minutes.
Are you sure? It'll just take a sec.
Yeah, I'm sure, but thank you. Were the kids okay?
Yeah, it's fine.
Did Christina remember she was staying late?
I hope so.
Dylan got another detention.
Oh, hell, what for this time?
He was doing an impression of someone I've never heard of in geography.
Idiot. Should we talk about...
I mean, literally never heard of them. Some YouTuber or grimy, who knows. And Otis was feeling a little better as I was leaving. Surprise, surprise.
Are you trying to fill the time before we go?
I suppose I am a bit. I'm nervous.
I'm sorry. If it wasn't for me, we wouldn't be here.
No.
Just no?
Yes, just... No, if it weren't for you, we wouldn't be here. A sad fact.
You wouldn't take a tiny bit of the responsibility?
No. Why?
Because it's a long and complicated road that's led us here, don't you think?
I mean, that depends how you look at it. There's the long and the complicated, and then there's... As the crow flies.
Talk me through the route your crow flies.
You slept with someone else, and now here we are.
There's a bit more to it than that, isn't there?
Which way do you go, then?
Crow or no crow?
Crow.
You stopped sleeping with me. I started sleeping with someone else.
That's such a short version and quite crude, if you don't mind me saying.
See, my version's actually longer than yours.
My version explains why we're actually here. Yours is just a short, partial version of the long mess that came before.
Yes, I made a mistake.
Can we just clear something up? How many mistakes was it in total?
Well, one.
One?
Yes. Depending on how you define it.
Oh, okay. Well, let's define it in a way that gives it the highest number, just so I know what we're dealing with.
Well, the highest number would be in the hundreds.
Jesus Christ.
Because of all the tiny, tiny decisions that led to the big mistake.
Oh, no. I'm not really interested in the tiny decisions. We need to leave in 5 minutes.
So one.
But when you said it depends on how you define it...
Well, you could define it as one affair, or you could define it as 4 mistakes.
How?
The first mistake repeated 3 times.
I'm not. How many times did you sleep with this guy? Not 3.
No, 1 mistake. 3 repetitions of the original mistake. The first time being the original sin, sort of thing, and the other 3 as duplicates.
You can't write 4 times off as being accidental. We'd be hard pushed to write 1 off as being accidental, to be honest. I mean, how would that work?
Look, I had an affair. Are you not consoled that it was only 4 times, not 40?
No, not really. I mean, once you get to 4, you might as well get to 40.
Well, I think if it had been 40, we would be having a different conversation.
Yes, one with lots of 40s in it instead of 4s.
You know what I mean? 40 would have meant it was going on for...
I'd like you to finish that sentence. How long would it have taken you to get to 40?
This is a ridiculous conversation.
No, I'm just looking for an approximate rate so we can calculate frequency as well as number.
Why?
Comparison.
There is no comparison. It's like comparing a 25-yard dash with a marathon.
And we're the marathon.
Yes, of course we are. Well, we're married. We've got children.
We didn't know that was going to happen when we started having sex. We weren't pacing ourselves. We didn't say, ooh, we better not go too hard at it in case we run out of sex in 15 years.
Look. Okay, these 4 times took place over a few weeks. Our first 4 times took place over a few days. But where does that get us? How long is it going to take us to get to 4 times from here?
Where's here, though?
Here, now, when we're not having sex at all.
If you want to stick with the running analogy.
Which I'm not committed to.
Right now, we are Usain Bolt with an injury. A groin strain, if you like.
We're both Usain Bolt, not just you.
Our sexual relationship is Usain Bolt with a groin strain. Yes, we're stalled. But once we're up and around, we'll hit 4 in no time.
Look, we've got less than 5 minutes. We should sort out an agenda that doesn't involve Olympic runners.
My agenda is, why did you sleep with someone else?
To answer that question, I suspect we have to answer a lot of others.
Really? Oh, they're out.
What, you can see the house from here?
Yeah, it's that one there with the green door. Those two. They've just been given a right counselling. They look shell-shocked.
They're completely fucked.
As in exhausted, or as in there's no future in the relationship?
Well, both. Look at them.
I mean, is that really what we want? To totally fuck our relationship? I mean, it's not like there's nothing of it left.
No, of course not.
I mean, we've got 2 kids for one thing.
Exactly. And
Crosswords.
yes,
And Game of Thrones.
when it's on.
I guess what I'm saying is I didn't think we had the kind of marriage that needed poking around in.
Poking around in.
I suppose it's a medical metaphor.
Well, it's quite a good one. If they opened you up and found you riddled with cancer, would you want them to sew you up again?
You know I don't like talking about cancer. Can't it be Ebola?
You'd rather have Ebola than cancer.
Harder to catch Ebola when you live in Kentish Town.
Yes, but the point of the metaphor is that you've got it, not that you haven't. So if we'd managed to avoid all marital disease, we wouldn't be sitting here now.
Fair enough. Okay. Cancer.
So do you want them to sew you up and pack you off?
How far has it gone?
Well, that's why they're poking around. I mean, they can't tell without a bit of a poke.
This is why I never go to the doctor.
Which takes us back to where we started. You see, you don't want to talk to anyone about our marriage. If it dies, you'd rather just find out about it because it collapses on the spot.
Yes, exactly. Look, you're a gerontologist. You know all about good deaths. I mean, keeling over suddenly, that's got to be one of them, right?
But that's a heart attack. Marriages don't die suddenly. They've been sick for a while before they kick the bucket.
Right.
Look, I think what I'm saying, medically speaking, is that either we leave it and it kills us, or we get it looked at. Okay?
Yes. I mean, I can't say I'm looking forward to it, but...
I don't want to run away from this.
Oh, of course not. I mean, however badly it goes, it's just an hour, right?
I was talking about the marriage, not the counselling.
Oh. All right. Oh, before we go, is it a man or a woman? You never said.
I did. It's a woman.
Oh, woman. Christ almighty.
You would have said exactly the same thing, wouldn't you, if I'd said it was a man?
Yes, but bad in a different way. I mean, if it was a man, I wouldn't be able to talk about anything intimate, obviously.
Obviously.
But if it's a woman, oh, man, I'm going to get slaughtered.
Slaughtered? Why won't you slaughter me?
Feminism. I know that you had the affair, but it'll turn out to be my fault. There'll be mitigating circumstances. Not just the bloody sex stuff, but she'll find out that you make all the money and do most of the cooking and whatever, even though you work and I don't, and you do all the boring arranging stuff, and I think she'll just write you a blank check. She'll be like, oh, go on, Louise, fill your boots, girl. You can have 10 affairs if you want them.
I don't think marital counsellors tell clients to have 10 affairs, and I really don't want 10. The one I had was very stressful.
She's going to write it off, that's for sure.
I won't let her. I'll tell her exactly how bad I've been.
I don't think we need all the details, do you?
Not like that. I mean, how awful I was, and unfair and sneaky and morally reprehensible.
Cool. Let's walk up this road for a minute and try and sort it out.
What are we sorting out?
Well, whether a man or a woman is best.
It's a woman sitting there waiting for us. There's nothing to sort out.
Well, it's not necessarily. We could forget about this and try and find a man.
Who, as you point out, would be bad in a different way.
I've changed my mind about that.
Oh, come on, Tom. This was your idea in the first place. Tom? Tom! Tom!
And that was the end of episode 1 of the State of the Union. And back in a minute with commentary and analysis. Thank you. And now analysis of the State of the Union, Season 1, Episode 1. I picked this because it's, like I said, emblematic of the brainwashing, socialist brainwashing that Western culture has undergone. The first thing that you notice about this, the couple, is their neutrality. They're very much neutral. Normally, what you would be going through in any type of a conflict is a search, number one, for who's to blame. And so that's the way, growing up, that's the way we used to do things. It's your fault. No, it's your fault. You might go through that. Sometimes it's your fault. Yes, you're right. It is my fault. And then what happens is then we go into an apology mode. There is then efforts to repair the damage done to the relationship, and you go from there. But now, today, everything is no fault. Everything is deterministic, and people approach everything from a neutral standpoint. And they approach it from a neutral standpoint because they think, erroneously, that is going to lead them to the truth, not realizing that the truth is not neutral. So they start out again, and throughout the series, they have neutral, because basically what happens after this, they never really go see the counselor. They just come back every week to talk about what it is that they want to talk about with the counselor. So it's like preparatory things. So determinism and the cult of neutrality raises its ugly head. Then we have determinism, where the wife is saying, yes, I had an affair, but I had the affair, and she says it's complicated. And this is again socialism. No problems are simple. Nothing is ever simple. Everything is complicated because of skepticism. Nothing can be known with certainty. You can only approximate or guess, or you can only have opinions. And so they're stuck in that as well. So the other thing is that he was talking about why she had an affair. Now, she made an allusion to it, saying that he wasn't having sex with her, and so that was part of determinism as well, is not my fault, it's your fault because you wouldn't have sex with me. So I had to go off, and they forced me to go off and have an affair. No, that's just baloney. If your spouse isn't doing whatever it is that they're supposed to do, you go to your spouse and you work the problem out. You sit down and you talk with them, and if necessary, again, you go and see a counselor first. You don't go out and have affairs. Relationships are fundamentally about loyalty. There are varying degrees of loyalty. Everybody you have a relationship with, from the postman to your spouse, you have a relationship with, and there is a certain amount of loyalty expected. Not as much loyalty from the postman as you would from, say, your spouse, but it's still a loyalty situation. And very much so in the case of a marriage. You're expected to remain loyal. If you're having problems, you have to work them out. You try to work them out with each other. If that's not going to work, maybe you get to talk to your parents again. And that's part of the problem as well in our culture today, is parents and family are denigrated, and they're viewed by socialist society as suspicious, and that they're bourgeois, and that they're capitalistic, and et cetera, et cetera. So they encourage people to go to professionals rather than talking to their own families and finding out, coming up with some potential ways of dealing or with the problem or solving the problem. And very often the families are no longer helpful anyways. If you go to your parents, they may very well say, well, why don't you go to a marriage counselor? And which is not very helpful. You really are looking for the support of your parents who may have gone through a similar problem. You can also talk to friends. Do you have friends that have gone through the similar problem? How did they handle it? And that might give you some ideas for solving the problem. But the basic idea of it is if you're going to have an argument, who's at fault here? And it seems to me she's at fault because she's the one that did something disloyal. He's not having sex with her. Okay, well, you try to work it out. You don't go out, rush out, and have an affair. So the real question is she going to own up to that she was disloyal, that she betrayed her vows, and that she needs to admit that and make amends? That's the first thing that needs to happen. Once that's done, then you can go back to the issue of why isn't he performing? Why isn't he having sex with her? So then you can get into that. But the first issue is, why are we at the point where we're almost getting a divorce? It's because you had an affair. You need to accept that, and you need to admit that you were wrong, and you need to make amends. That's the way the true conservative does things. The socialists, again, want to keep everything neutral, and instead of dealing with the problem yourself or with family members or maybe even clergy, talking to your priest about it, you go right away to a psychologist or a psychiatrist. And the problem with a lot of the psychologists is that they're as neutral as everyone else. So you sit down, instead of the psychologist acting as a referee and saying, okay, you're at fault, what are you going to do to fix the relationship? They are going to be reflecting questions back at you. How do you feel about this? Why do you feel about this? You get into this big, deep psychoanalysis that may take months and months, and you never get a satisfactory resolution to the original issue. You just end up. It's a great scam for the psychologists because they get to, again, have you coming back again and again and again, and you really end up getting nowhere. So that's, like I said, a good reason to keep psychologists and psychiatrists for last. If you've dealt with other people, maybe you don't have anybody else, or if you have, you've already talked to your parents, you've talked to your friends, you've talked to, maybe you want to go into some kind of, maybe there's a group you can join first. But in any case, if you've done all that and none of that has proved to be helpful, then I would suggest going to see a psychologist. And I'm saying all of this as a matter of common sense. You solve problems at the lowest possible level. We don't want to go and immediately get professionals involved, especially since they're going to be involved in our personal lives. Both of these individuals, by the way, are not terribly happy about or looking forward to having some stranger, as he said, poking about in their marriage. So, but again, the series itself is selling something. It's selling neutrality, because on the one hand, also you're thinking to yourself, or I was when I first saw the series, wow, I wish all relationships could be this, when they hit a rocky point, they could be this calm and civilized. But then I realized, because I had the little voice in my head said, no, there's something wrong with that. That what's wrong with that, the consequence of that, of having this very civilized, neutral discussion, is that you never solve the problem. The problem never goes away. And it seems that then it provides simply an excuse for failure, for divorce in this particular case. So that was a little bit of an analysis and commentary on the show, Season 1, Episode 1 of State of the Union. Back in a minute. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. So I'm reminding you that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.